There we go. Hi, everybody. So today with us, we've got James Rowling, who is one of our group members and has kindly agreed to be interviewed and explain a little bit about himself and what he does. James is the author of Activate Your Inner Physician and also the creator of Pattern Release Energetics. You'll have seen some of his posts in group. He's got so much information on how we can become more empowered over our medical situations, and we're going to learn a little bit more about that and what he does today. So welcome, James, and thank you for joining us. So can you tell us a little bit about how you went from chiropractic work into energy work and how you came to become an author and creator of energetics pattern release?
Okay, well, thanks for having me, Jim. Um, I would start by saying before I went to chiropractic college, which was I started when I was 35 in chiropractic college, and before then I had already started for a decade or so um, exploring things like different types of yoga, Reiki, um, and other things that would be classified as energy work.
Yeah.
So, and I was teaching hatha yoga also. So by the time I got to chiropractic college, I had a foundation in a different approach to health. Because in chiropractic college, you essentially get the standard medical training in
Mm.
addition to how to how to do adjusting of joints, which of course is a very different model than somebody who's doing Reiki or energy work.
Absolutely.
So when I started out doing chiropractic in a fairly standard way because you have to you have to be careful when you're a chiropractor when you're starting out, and um, you want to have a technique and an approach that will help you get some relief for people pretty consistently, but something also that you can use as a departure point so that you
Okay.
can actually start to learn what works and what doesn't and start to evolve your own approach. Um, Now, over time, and really not intentionally, the other work I had done earlier, yoga and energy work and so forth, started to inform the chiropractic work. So, to make a long story short, by the time I was about halfway through my chiropractic practice, which lasted 10 years, I started to realize I could adjust joints and feel joint misalignments on people without touching them.
Fascinating. Yeah.
So they would be lying on the table, and what I would do is I had a full-length plastic skeleton in the office that I used for teaching purposes and also just for personal reference. And I realized I could feel things on the physical body of the person on the table on the plastic skeleton. And so, you know, it went through several different evolutions, but when you realize that you can use a surrogate as a reference to the actual client, it
Yeah.
really opens up possibilities.
Yeah.
And by the time I finished calling myself a chiropractor, because eventually it just didn't seem like the thing to call myself, and that's not what people expect when they go to a chiropractor.
You
But by the
evolved.
time yeah, by the time I finished, I was doing most of the adjustments off the body, even though the client was in the office. But my conclusion was, well, why should I even have an office if I can adjust people from a distance. If I
Mm.
don't have to have physical contact with them in the office and, have their presence right there. So that led to doing distance work. And so I started doing that. I've been doing that for 8 years now. I started calling it pattern release energetics because over time, the more you work with the non-physical elements of the human energy field, the more access you get to things like emotional patterns, psychological factors,
Absolutely. I found
psychics.
that with
Yeah,
Reiki.
exactly. Interdimensional things. They all start to, you just get increased access to information about what it is that is culminating in what the person wants to resolve for themselves.
Mm.
So all this information starts to come in, and then the challenge becomes, well, how do I know what's useful information and what isn't? And the conclusion I came to is only to ask for as much as creates movement.
Okay.
Because essentially what I find is that there are aspects of the energy field that get stuck, that are lacking movement. It's just like the physical body.
Yeah.
And whatever it takes to create movement, to get these things unstuck and to move things along in a direction of healing or wholeness, that's as much information as you need, because any more is just, it's too much for the mind. The mind just gets way too involved.
So you have to be specific with what you're adjusting and what you're asking, emotion wise as well. You have to be very specific.
Um, okay. Again, oh, let me just tell you how I would work with a person in a session these days. Um, I have a book of lists that I reference. Some are anatomical terms, some are psychological and emotional terms, and then things from the psychic realm, spiritual realm, and I have them all compiled in lists. So when I'm making contact with that person's energy field, I'm asking about whatever that issue is that they wanted to address. It could be a shoulder problem, it could be chronic nightmares, PTSD, things like that.
Yeah.
So whatever they give me as their focus point, that is the entry point that I use. And then whatever shows up in the session has something to do with that focus point.
Okay.
Otherwise, it wouldn't show up. Um, so as far as the specificity, let's say, for instance, I ask, okay, is there something emotional going on here? And I get a hit, okay? It's kind of like somebody nudges me.
Yeah.
And then I consult the list and I look for the particular emotions that are basically the ones that are not being expressed, that are manifesting in a physical disease, for instance. Um, so I get labels for the emotions, and sometimes I get a particular age where the emotional pattern was either initiated or it was particularly reinforced or triggered in a major way.
Yeah.
Because once these things are initiated at whatever, age 4 or 5, then throughout our lives, if they never get any expression or revisiting, then we, like it or not, we revisit them through physical ailments or through crappy relationships or
Yeah.
jobs that we hate, whatever.
Repeated
It's going
behavior
to keep,
patterns.
Right. It's going to keep coming back in our face until we realize that we are creating it
Yeah.
and that what's driving it is something that we are choosing to remain asleep to. It's something that it's hidden that until it gets revealed, it will continue to run things behind the scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is why I was always quite drawn to you, James, because you and I, although I don't work with the medical side of things, whereas you do, we both seem to have the understanding and agreement that it's not good to suppress the more negative emotions. In fact, it can be dangerous and it can be detrimental in the long run to stuff all that down, and it does need expressing and it does need feeling. It's just fascinating to me how we both do very different things, but there's very similar undercurrents about expression.
Well, you know, what that goes to show you is how fluid all of this is.
Yeah, so interconnected.
Well, that there are so many different ways you can get at this material that once it gets liberated can totally restore vitality and wholeness
Yeah,
and health to your life. And there are so many ways to get at it. And I mean, that's evidenced by the fact that there are so many different types of healthcare out there that will get you similar results.
yeah.
Um, but you were talking about, you know, the need to stop the suppression and the repression of uh, emotions and feelings. And it's difficult because it is so reinforced by the culture at large.
Oh, yeah.
And in ways that we don't even recognize as such because
A
they've
lot of it.
just become the way it is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a culture that we really need to. Hopefully, if enough of us wake up to the fact that it's not helpful. Hopefully, if enough people do, it'll push the scales, tip the scales and the balance, and more people will start expressing themselves because it becomes toxic. And when you do the sort of work that you and I do, you can spot it a mile off, that repression. And I don't always see it in the illness terms that you do, because that's not the direction I've gone. But we're obviously both working with people that are ill, either emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually, because of repressed emotions. And it's such a shame because it doesn't have to be that way.
Right. Well, one of the big challenges that we face in learning how to express emotions that aren't really socially acceptable is that we have to revisit the initial event where we repress them. And we really don't like doing that because once we once we think we've become adults, that whole world of childhood emotion, childhood feeling, the perspective that a child has becomes very foreboding to an adult because it seems so raw and so irrational. And when we think we've become an adult, which is an illusion to begin with, um, we think now we're a rational being, and I don't need to go back there and experience that because that was then. It's
Yeah, it stays with you though, doesn't it?
well, everything is still present. You know,
Yeah.
it really helps when you're doing energy work. One of the things that really opens up your access is to learn how to let go of the concept of linear time.
Oh, yeah. I talk about that with clients a
And
lot.
exactly. And to let go of that idea as life as a continuum. You know, we're born, we're we grow up, we become adults, etc. It's not, there's no timeline here. Everything is still present at once and it's accessible
Yeah.
immediately. It's just that we guard it. The conscious mind is a brutal gatekeeper.
It wants to keep us
But
feeling.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a shame because a lot of the safety behaviours that we put in place as children are not serving us now, and in fact they're holding us back from creating the life that we want, and it's self-sabotage by the subconscious mind, and we can access that via the work you do, via the work I do, and so many other modalities that are out there, and it doesn't have to be that way. It's I think more and more people now are sort of understanding the idea of quantum physics and energy work. It's not quite as taboo as it used to be, but there's still a long way to go.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, one way I just wanted to mention that you just mentioned how childhood patterns don't serve us as adults, that can also reflect in the physical body in the sense of, I'll never forget this one person I had as a client in my chiropractic practice who started ballet when she was about 5 years old. And that is really young to start forming the body. You're not skeletally or muscularly mature, and yet you're pursuing this really rigorous discipline. And in addition to that, there can be pressure from the parents to around performance and getting it right, and always going to your classes and being really uh, adept at what you're doing. So there's that aspect too. And this woman came to see me as a 24-year-old, and she had left ballet behind like a dozen years ago. But what was still evident in her skeletal misalignment were the positions of ballet.
Right.
So the first, second, third position and that type of thing. And part of her treatment was to get her body to let go of ballet. Even though she hadn't done it in 12 years, her body was still holding the patterns, along with the pressure that she
Pain that
experienced
would
as
be.
a 5. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, amazing. See, isn't it amazing? All those years, and still the body was holding on to those ballet positions that were causing her an issue. It really is
Exactly.
fascinating. And did it help finding the emotions attached to the ballet, and it was releasing them that then allowed the body to release?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Because doing everything simultaneously is I find um, the ideal route to healing. Because
holistic.
if you try, because the body and the mind have formed this pattern in their own way, and it's not up to me to decide how it needs to let go of it. So the way I think of it is, I'm just witnessing what's there.
Yeah,
And witnessing, in my experience, is 95% of healing. Because we are taught not to witness ourselves. We're taught to judge ourselves
yeah.
instead.
We're always
So for
looking at
instance,
everything else except ourselves.
exactly, and especially when it comes to health issues. If I have some strange feeling in my chest, like my heart starts to race for seemingly no reason, my first impulse is to freak out
Yeah.
because I've been taught over years to be suspicious and fearful about my body. And so my mind will go, uh-oh, what's wrong? There's something
And then
wrong
you're going
here.
to
That's,
release adrenaline and cortisol, which perpetuates the stress.
yeah. so that the first assumption comes up, there's something wrong, and now the second impulse is I have to find somebody to help me instead
Mm.
of instead of the first impulse being, oh, what's this? Why am I creating this? And let me find out by going in.
It's a real mind shift, isn't it? Mindset shift.
Oh, it's huge. It's simple, but it's huge.
James, was there a pivotal moment where that mindset shift happened for you?
Um, well, for one thing, with my own health issues, there was a childhood that was full of um, throat and ear infections, which entailed a lot of antibiotic treatment. And over time, what that did was it really screwed up my digestion. So I was before I got into healthcare or energy work or anything, I was always looking for somebody to help me with my digestion
Yeah.
and never, asking myself, well, what is this? Because I didn't know how to do that yet. But once I realized that I had to start bringing my attention inward to really find the root of why that was a chronic problem for myself, um, it opened up this whole world for me of, well, that's one thing that happens with chronic antibiotic treatment
Yeah.
is it destroys a lot of useful bacteria in your guts. And also, I recognized over time which emotional patterns became linked to the digestive problems.
So you noticed this
And
within
so,
yourself.
oh yeah. Well, okay, here's the thing, Jen. That is, if I hadn't recognized all of the stuff that I work with other people on in myself first, I would never have had a basis for the whole pattern release approach. So um, I always say to people, you have to be the guinea pig. You have to be the proving ground because you can't ask other people to go somewhere you haven't gone yourself.
Oh, so true. I'm smiling because I think I mean, you and I have talked a little bit about my past, and I know that I've talked about it in group as well, so most of them know. And some of the things I experienced earlier on in my life, I went through lots of different counselling when I was younger, when I was late teens, 20s, and I often ran away. And looking back, they were people that had gone and they'd gone to maybe university or whatever, and they'd done the paperwork that needed to get the certificate to be able to counsel, but hadn't the empathy that you have when you've been through it yourself. Do you know
Right.
what I mean? I mean, it is a case of, like the group says, heal yourself, heal the world. It comes from within. When you've had to heal yourself, you then hold your hand out to others to help show the way. And that's essentially what you're saying that you've done as well. It's come from a real
Yes,
personal.
exactly.
Yeah.
And if you haven't gone through that yourself first, then the tendency is to be too much of a fixer. Oh, I'm going to fix this. Because the empathy really isn't there.
Yeah.
And so it just reverts to, I'm going to fix this person's problem. Well, that's not what they need because they're not broken in the first place.
No, exactly. Yeah.
They're just in a human body having a life.
Yeah. It's just all experiences, isn't it? And it's how we perceive them and how we look at them and how we either act or don't act that creates more of that issue. I know that you've helped me a lot. Group members may not know, but James has massively helped. I had terrible migraine issue for a couple of years now, and I've barely had one since James did some work for me. And it amazed me. It really did. I mean, I'm open energetically anyway. I've been doing this sort of work for a while, and I knew that this sort of thing was out there, but I'd never experienced it before. Um, and it was marvelous, I have to say. You can't explain it when it happens to you. I was going from like, 3 or 4 migraines every couple of weeks to none. It was marvelous. So, can you give
Fantastic.
us some examples of people that you've helped and the type of thing that you've helped as well?
Okay. Um, well, let's just use chronic headaches as an example, if you don't mind. Okay.
Mind?
Well, it's interesting that, for one thing, that was a late onset in life uh, health event for you,
It was, yeah.
because for a lot of people that will start quite early, the chronic migraines. So that was the first thing that tipped me off when you told me how it was something that had been around for like a dozen years or so, or maybe
Yeah,
less.
it's been around
Yeah,
for
it was less.
yeah.
Okay, now that's where my training came in a little bit. And let me just say one thing about that is that in the work I do, you have to involve your conscious mind in your training to a certain extent. And then there's a point at which you have to let all of that go as well and let whatever is in front of you reveal itself. Because if you just go with the training and the assumptions and the expectations and, oh, I've seen this before,
Yeah.
then you can totally miss what's in front of you because you have a unique situation right there.
A unique
That's
person.
trying, yeah, exactly. And it's trying to tell you its story. But if you try to impose a story on it so that you can be the expert, well, you're just not going to get the same kind of um, depth of healing or the kind of access you would if you can just let go of the model of anatomy or the model of psychology or whatever that you've studied over years.
Yeah.
So when you told me about when the headache started, I thought, okay, that's interesting. That there's something that occurred around that point that I bet will show up in this session. So there was a car accident,
That's right, yeah.
right? And there were certain injuries that you suffered to the upper neck and the skull, and also your brain. There was a concussion.
Yeah.
So all of that surfaced within the session just by you asking me to examine the migraines. So you choosing to use that as your focus point dictates what your energy field is going to display. And then it's up to me to stand in for you
Yeah.
because you can't get access to it for whatever reason. I stand in for you and I witness it. And in essence, I'm witnessing your ability to heal yourself.
Right.
Okay? It's a whole different way of thinking about what a practitioner is.
Yeah. It's
But
unlike anything that conventional medicine offers. It's just not anything like that, is it?
no, it's not. It's about you're the patient, I'm the doctor, you're the broken one, I'm the one who knows. Let's play our roles, pretty
Yeah.
much. So getting back to the headaches, so that was a big thing to find was that there was a definite structural injury that needed to be adjusted. And one of the things that contributes a lot to chronic musculoskeletal things like that are ligaments that have not been adequately adjusted, which is something I do that's very powerful. So that was one of the first things to address. It showed up immediately. Now, once you get the skeleton and the muscles and the ligaments in their proper alignment and get that injury pattern addressed, then any kind of emotional and psychological patterns that have attached themselves, so to speak, to that accident, those start to come up in the session as well.
Yeah.
And as far as that goes, again, I'm just witnessing what's there. I'm not trying to influence the person's emotions or anything. It's just that if something surfaces from age 10 around anger, for instance, that child never got to express for various reasons, and I'm able to witness it for the person, it gets a certain amount of release along with the adjustment of the skull and the upper neck and the brain. So it's all coming back into a wholeness in the sequence that it wants to. When I don't try to tamper with it, I'm just witnessing it.
It's fascinating as well because you've mentioned sort of emotions coming up from early childhood, but as well, I know from working with you, past life stuff can come up as well from doing these adjustments, which is fascinating. I do a bit of past life work with the Akashic Records, but again, it's not medical. It's not with a medical lens like you do. And so, yeah, I was fascinated to find out that you could also get past life memories expressing themselves through the body and through these adjustments.
Yeah, that's a really interesting aspect of this. Let's see. The way I look at the past life elements is that there are, if first of all, if you do believe that we have other existences, it opens up the possibilities of, well, what were the common themes in those other existences that I'm experiencing now?
Yeah.
And what has been carried over again and again? And those are the kinds of elements that are useful when a past life element is part of the session. Is, oh, okay, I've been doing this before. You know, the last time I was the mother and she was the daughter. And, you know, very interesting that sometimes the roles are reversed.
Yeah.
And the person who's the victim in this lifetime was the oppressor in the last one.
Yeah, I found that with my work too.
So there's it starts to make you realize how we're trying to experience a lot of life, a lot about life, but we have an ego that resists and prefers experiencing certain things.
Yeah.
Because of, yeah, and because we want to believe certain things about ourselves and want others to believe certain things about ourselves. And so this whole universe of our other attributes and impulses all gets buried.
Yeah.
And that's what will show up, for instance, in past lives. Is, okay, well, you think you're having a hard time now. Look at this past life where you really gave other people a hard time, and it starts to put things in perspective. where somebody can start to let go of that feeling of victimhood because they realize they've been on the other side of it.
Yeah,
And
it's just all
also,
it. Yeah, we're here to
yeah,
experience all the nuances that there are. I remember part of the work you did for me was showing me the good aspects that revealed themselves and the shadow aspects that revealed themselves.
hmm
I can't remember what they were. I think there was the sort of saints type behaviour, the healing and the wanting to help, and then there was this shadow aspect that needed more expression, um, which I completely identified with when you explained it to me, because it's quite true that I've always struggled to express the feisty side of myself, apart from with a very select few people. And because of that, I was taken advantage of quite a lot because of my good nature. So I absolutely do need to bring that shadow side in a little bit more. And that's something that I continuously have to work on.
right. Yeah, that's definitely a big part of what I do because those aspects that aren't getting any time on the stage, the way they make themselves known, because they are going to make themselves known, uh, is through things like chronic physical pain,
Yeah,
nightmares, um, behaviors that the person just can't explain sometimes, but are destructive.
yeah,
So for instance, if someone is determined to believe that they're not an angry person, let's say they grew up in an angry household and it was just a nightmare.
mm,
So they decide as a child, I'm never going to be like that, when in fact it's already ingrained in them. But that anger gets stuffed. And now the person goes to the other extreme and is always nice and polite all the time, even when the situation doesn't warrant that
me,
whatsoever.
myself, and Irene.
What's that?
Like the film Me, Myself, and Irene with Jim Carrey, where he's
Oh,
got on his and everyone treats him terrible and he's so polite, and then he's got this alter ego. And I think that can happen a lot. Obviously, that was exaggerated for film, but I think that does happen a lot in life. People have this mask and a secret sort of identity because they don't feel safe.
absolutely,
Yeah,
exactly. And then, but that never goes away. It's always there, uh, knocking on the door, wanting us to give it some expression because it is part of us, and it may make itself known through like a chronic stomach ulcer,
mm,
because every time that person would want to express anger, really gets angry justifiably, but still stuffs it down and is nice instead, then the stomach problem surfaces and says, will you please feel your anger already? But
yeah.
again, what that would entail would be that person going back to that child and that decision to never feel that.
Yeah, it needs acknowledgement. It needs acknowledgement and revisiting. Absolutely. I'm curious as well, James, with the work that you do. Um, with the work I do, karma does sort of come into things. There are certain things that can't be altered because it's karmically right, and then there are things that can be altered because it was a justifiable thing, so that can be cleared. I'm curious, when you do your work, have you ever come up against anything that can't be altered because karmically it needs to be there, and so the soul won't let go of that? Does that
Oh,
make sense?
definitely. Yes. Well, one particular example of that would be when I encounter a spirit attachment. And by that, I mean And these things are really a lot more common than
I
people
know.
want to believe. So what I'm talking about is really the spirit of someone who's passed on, but has not moved on. So they're still operating at the earthly plane because whatever unresolved issues they took into their death process are so strong, and they're in such an ungrounded state that they can't move to the next, whatever's next for them.
Yeah.
So they seek out somebody to commiserate with, and they seek out a living person who shares their particular
The energetic
emotional.
signature.
Exactly, bingo, and right down to physical things actually,
Yeah.
like chronic headaches or a shoulder problem or something like that. And 9 times out of 10, that will be something that really is fairly simple to interact with, because they really just want what a living person wants, which is to have their story told very briefly. They want acknowledgement, a little bit of empathy, and then they're gone.
Yeah.
But that 10th time, sometimes there's something there that the individual, his or herself, has to attend to, and I'm not allowed to interact or intervene or tamper or anything. The
Yeah.
one that comes to mind recently is a client who had like it came through as an imaginary childhood friend
Okay.
that that he kind of beckoned forth from another dimension because he was lonely and he wanted companionship, and it was up to him to know how to let go of that, because it was such a special relationship that he had initiated. It
He
was not a
manifested.
case where exactly, it was not a
Yeah.
case where a spirit attachment sought him out because of his common attributes. It was something that he consciously created.
That's free will.
That exactly, and I think that's an example of something you're talking about, that a karmic element that he had created and needed to
Yeah.
fully embrace himself and let go of. Because obviously it was no longer serving him as an adult to have this childhood friend still around.
No. No, I'm sure that must have been quite
Yeah.
difficult for. But thank God for people that are open-minded and that can help with that sort of thing. Have you had many clients when you've brought up things like spirit attachments, or when you've attempted to talk to them about their shadow aspects? Have you ever had clients that have not taken too well to that? Or
Well, no, Jim. Well, yes, I've learned my lessons along the way, um, with a lot of help from my girlfriend Amy as well, about giving out too much information initially, and to give out some information that will be easily digested. And once the person sees that it's something relatable, then you start into something a little more difficult if you think they're ready for it. Other
yeah,
people will jump in with both feet. So
there are
for sure,
definitely
it's
that feel.
I'll tell you one thing. Go ahead. What?
Sorry, I was just going to say there are definitely some things that bringing up like attachments and things. I definitely still feel slightly awkward when that's come up for a client that I'm working with and I have to then bring it up. There's still that
Yes.
apprehension there of how's it going to be received.
And I think that has in large part to do with how it's been represented in literature, in drama, in movies.
Yeah,
You've got The Exorcist, you've got any number of things we could reference that make it look like a horrible thing. And it's
And it's actually, like you said, very common, and it's not like a big bad boogeyman or anything like that. It's actually really quite common and easy to sort out.
right. And these are really spirits that need empathy. They don't need to be hunted down and expelled and cast out. They're just people who are lost,
Yeah,
just as
absolutely.
they were in life, and just as so much of us are in life, walking around in lost in thought, lost in our pain, and then we carry it into our death process. And if it's that strong, sometimes they
Yeah,
can wander around for quite a while.
sadly so. Have you always been an empath, James? Because, I mean, I don't think we've discussed it, you and I, before, but I feel that you are an empath. Have you always known that you were?
You know, I feel like I'm a poster child for anybody can do this.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. Because growing up, I never, no, I never felt like an empath. I never saw things that I thought were paranormal phenomena. Um, I had one distinct experience of encountering a ghost from childhood, and that's really it. It wasn't until, other than that, you know, it was a pretty standard. My life was full of studies and athletics, but when I started to look into things like yoga and different ways to explore the limits of consciousness and things like that, uh, things just started to open up for me. And I noticed that I had a facility for contacting, learning how to contact my own energy field, and then being able to translate that into feeling it with other people. But
Yeah.
it wasn't until my 20s really that this sort of thing started to come around.
It's interesting because
So
with
I
sorry, I know we've got a little bit of a time lag, haven't we? I
oh
was just
no,
going to
go ahead.
say, with the Reiki, because I know that you're a Reiki practitioner yourself as well. Obviously,
I did, yeah.
could you feel the physical ailments when you were doing Reiki on a person? For myself, I feel the emotions, but I know some people feel the where there might have been an old injury or something. So when you did Reiki, could you feel it then?
My experience with Reiki was kind of kind of abbreviated. It definitely got me to a place where I could start to feel the general energy field on somebody,
Yeah,
but I definitely didn't. I didn't take the Reiki practice to the extent of actually treating things. It was more to get a general sense of the energy field. Later on, however, as I started to do the type of work I do now, let's say I'm working on somebody who has a chronic shoulder problem, I may start to experience some problems with my own chronic shoulder stuff the night before. Or if I have particular clients that have a lot of repressed rage, I might, have a little bit of a challenge with that myself before and after the treatment. So, yeah, when you are interacting that intimately with another person's field, it will magnetize some of the common attributes you have with the client.
yeah, absolutely.
And, and that's
Can you
probably
tell,
one reason they made it to you in the first place.
yeah, possibly. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to write your book?
Boy, that was, I still can't believe how quickly that happened. Um, when I started to realize that the real key I felt to healing was a shift of attention. I just was like, I really want to share this because
Yeah,
I think that people need to hear the simplicity of this, first of all, because of the ridiculous complexity we make out of our health. It really is a very simple event if we want it to be. But unfortunately, we use our health for all kinds of justifications and rationalizations and to sustain certain identities in our life. And so our health itself becomes hostage to the mind
yeah,
and what its agendas are. And the more I saw that, the more I felt that I really wanted to get that out there
yeah.
because I felt like, yeah, I mean, somebody can ask me for a session, but the real thing I have to offer here is to help somebody recover their own ability to heal themselves.
Empowerment.
Yeah, and I wish more people would take me up on
Yeah,
that.
it's an important
But
message, and the thing with spirituality is, as we've already said, there are so many aspects, so many fragments, so many modalities, and not everybody is going to resonate with everything, and that's okay. But it is important to get your message and how I feel like that about my own message out there for those that it will resonate with and for those that it will make sense to. And that could affect a huge change in their life going forward. Because especially with chronic illness, it is crippling. I mean,
yes,
going back a number of years ago, I could barely walk. I had to leave my job and everything. It was, I was full of neurological stuff going on, and as well as the chronic pain and everything like that. And it was as I went through my spiritual path, just even meditating made a massive difference, and the Reiki made a massive difference. And then obviously I've done some work with you, and now that's made a massive difference. So although not everybody might resonate with somebody's message, it's about being open-minded and about giving things a real good go, because you never know. You never know. It could be life-changing.
exactly. And there's never one person that's going to give you everything that you need
Yeah,
either. So when you experience something life changing with one practitioner or an approach or a technique, hopefully that is a departure point to start exploring within yourself what is my individual expression of this.
yeah,
How can I get to know the language that is particular to me that my mind and body speaks? Because we're not taught to explore that language at all. We hand it over to other people, and then it's lost.
we're not taught to be proud of it either, I don't think.
No,
And it's a shame. We're taught to be proud of academia, and that sort of thing, and not so much what I call our soul gifts, which we all have. No one's exempt. We all have soul gifts, but we have free
yeah,
will whether we choose to express them or not. But we are,
mm-hmm.
I find, and certainly with clients, and I know you will have found this, once they do tap into that, they find they become more naturally abundant. And I don't just mean financially, I mean more abundant in joy, more abundant with everything, but authentically, instead of walking around with the mask smiling and tears of, crying behind the mask.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a strange paradox that we are creatures that are always seeking to know ourselves, but we are resisting it like crazy at the same time.
Yeah.
And one of those things about learning how to relearning how to heal oneself is that it is threatening to a lot of people because of the degree of self responsibility that it creates in their lives. Um, because again, we're not really taught to value, even though we give a lot of lip service to it. We're not really taught to value how to be that personal responsibility is something that's very empowering, and
Yeah.
particularly in your own health. But like you say, when you start to realize, oh, that is within my own capability to solve this problem within myself, or let this go, let this particular thing go, that fear of personal responsibility starts to dissipate because you see how much vitality and energy it has returned to your life.
Yeah. The proof is in the pudding, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, is there anything else you would like to share with us, James, before you give everybody your details on where they can find you?
Let's see. You know, I think that two of the most important things that I teach people, or I don't really teach, I just remind. It's not like these are things to be taught. We've always known how to do them, is how to breathe properly and how to stay grounded.
Yeah.
Those are the two most powerful tools I think any individual can have to be able to heal oneself, and to also know throughout the day when you're in a state that needs some attention,
Yeah.
like, I better ground myself because I can feel myself going into helpless
Panic.
child mode here. Yeah, anything.
Yeah.
Um, and know how to get back into, very quickly, a state where you have a
Mm.
choice.
It's priceless.
So it is. I can't tell you how valuable those
Absolutely.
things are.
Would you like to show it? Would you like to show people how to do that?
Well,
Am I putting you on?
really, what's that?
I hope I'm not putting you on the spot.
Oh, no. They're very, very easy descriptions, actually, without even demonstrating. As
Okay.
far as grounding goes, um, what I tell people is before you even leave the house in the morning, you sit yourself down in a chair, put your feet flat on the floor, and feel the soles of your feet connected to the earth. You bring your breathing down into your belly. That's where it belongs. It doesn't belong up in the rib cage or up in the collarbones. So you bring it down to your belly. Um, and then you can, for instance, feel like a rod going through your spine, also into the earth. And the last thing I tell people to do is lightly touch the top of your head, just to bring yourself into your body. And very often you'll feel like a subtle shift, like, that's where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah,
And
it's
you
lovely.
actually notice, you would just feel more present. And now you're in a position to see what the world elicits from you. Whereas
Yeah,
if you
it's
go out the door and you're already in a state of anxiety, forget about it. You've got a target on your head.
yeah. See what grounding and meditation perfectly does is shut down those chemicals that are spraying your logical mind and your mind where you're able to problem solve, it shuts all that down, all the anxiety, cortisol, adrenaline. So when we meditate and when we ground ourselves, you're breaking that cycle, and that's why you're then able to really think and look and be aware of what's really going on and tap into your own power.
Good
Thank you
point.
so much
Yeah.
for sharing that with the group, because I know a lot of them do struggle. A lot of you do struggle, don't you, with the anxiety and with grounding. So the more grounding exercises that we can get into the group, the better. Absolutely.
Well, the last thing I would say about grounding is that uh, because from a very early age, we're taught to believe that a human being is a collection of disparate elements, like an emotional self, a psychological self, a spiritual self, and so forth. We start to really believe that that's the case. And then we start to sequester parts of ourselves from other parts, and they don't communicate. Now my emotional self isn't communicating with my physical self, giving rise to illness, for instance.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's one of what I find is a major source of illness and dysfunction, is that extreme separation that we encourage in our model of what a human being is. So when you get grounded, you're in a state where you're encouraging you're encouraging those parts of yourself to communicate.
Integration.
So they're
Yeah,
more in communication. Right, exactly. They're more integrated, and now you can be, in any situation, you can start to more accurately assess what your internal state is, for instance, and how you're reacting to it.
yeah.
Instead
It's
of
so
entering the situation where you're already scared, right? And so now there's no communication going on between the scared part of you and the part of you that knows that fear is groundless.
yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much, James. Can you tell everybody your email address where they can find you if they want to book any sessions with you? And as well, can you tell them where to find your book?
Yes. Right now, I have a new Facebook page, and it's so the whole thing is my name and pattern release energetics. So it's James Rowling, and that last name is ROLWING, pattern release energetics. So that's the new Facebook page. My email address is my last name and then my first name, rollwingjames@yahoo.com. And my book is an ebook, and it's available at amazon.com. And you can either just find it through my name, James Rowling, or Activate Your Inner Physician.
Fabulous. And what I will do as well, James, is when we post this interview in the group, we'll put all your details underneath in the first comment as well to make it easy for everybody to find you.
Great.
Because I'm sure that there'll be a few interested people after hearing your journey and what the sort of results that you can get for people.
Great. Thank you, Jem.
Oh, I've really enjoyed talking to you. It's been so nice because we've sort of emailed back and forth, and
I
it's just
know.
to talk to you face to face. So
Yeah,
thank you for joining me, and we'll have to do this again because I know you've got
for
great things.
sure.
So we'll get you back on and perhaps talk about the other book for the men.
Oh, yeah, yeah, that would be great.
We could do. James has also authored a book about the full male body orgasm, is it?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
right.
Right. Did you want me to describe that briefly?
You can describe that briefly for our male members, yeah?
Yeah, it's a book that takes some of the sexual energy techniques from things like Taoist yoga and Kundalini yoga and Tantric yoga, and puts them in a easy to understand context. I try to take out all the esoteric language and just have a really straightforward approach for having full body orgasms and learning things like semen retention, ejaculation control, and things like that. So,
Because that's a whole other interview.
oh yeah, I'd love to do that. That would be great.
No, I think we should. I think we'll do that for any of our members that may be interested. The women may be interested. They might want to talk to their partners about it. And I know we
Absolutely.
do have some male members that may be interested in that. So I think we'll do that at some point as well.
Okay, great.
Thank you for joining me tonight. It's been
Oh,
lovely,
thank you. Yeah, it
and
was
I'll see
great.
you again. Thanks,
Okay,
Jay.
bye, Jen. Okay.